evening, Father.
It's truly a great joy to be with all of you to begin the new year. The new year is a time when Catholics throughout the world gather for the Eucharist, to congratulate Mary on the birth of her child, to look at the baby pictures again and recall how 2016 years ago our God broke into our history and became part of our family because he loves us so much and he wants to be close to us. That's what we celebrate here tonight. It's also the day when the Church asked us to pray for peace. We know how much violence and hatred and persecution of our brothers and sisters in different parts of the world is taking place right now. And so, in a very special way, we want to join our prayer with prayers of believers all over the world as we pray for peace in our world. Today, being here at the Eucharistic Shrine of St. Clement's, it's an opportunity for me to publicly, on behalf of the whole Catholic community, to thank the Oblates of the Virgin Mary for the wonderful ministry that takes place here. We're so glad that Father David is with us and grateful to Father Peter for his reflections on the mysteries of the Rosary, and to all of the members of this community for their presence among us and for the wonderful ministry that they do here in the Archdiocese. Recently, I heard the story of a man who was very hard of hearing, and he went to the doctor, and the doctor gave him one of these new hearing aids. It was very, very tiny. You couldn't see it. It was the latest state of the art. And he said to the man, "Come back in a month, and we'll see how it's working." So the old man returned a month later, and he said to the doctor, "It's working perfectly." And the doctor said, "What does your family think?" He said, "Well, I haven't told them yet," he said. "But I've changed my will 5 times during this month." In the second reading today, St. Paul says that we are God's children. We are his heirs, not because we deserve it. If it were only what we deserved, I think we'd be written out of the will too. But we are his heirs because of Christ. When the fullness of time had come, God sent his Son so that we might receive adoption as sons and daughters. You are no longer slaves, but sons and daughters, and also heirs through God. And by the way, God doesn't need a hearing aid. He hears our innermost thoughts. He hears our prayers with affection and the solicitude of a good parent who rises in the middle of the night when the baby cries. God is always listening. He's listening with love and with expectation. He hears our gossip. He hears our criticisms, our boasting, our cynicism, our cuss words. We want him to hear also our prayers. Not always formal prayers and formulas, but a simple conversation with the Lord. As St. Paul tells us in the second reading, as proof that you are sons and daughters, God has sent the Spirit of Christ into your hearts, crying out, "Abba, Father." Put your hand on your heart. The Spirit of Christ is there. When Jesus prayed, he cried out, "Abba, Father." You know, it's interesting in the New Testament There are special words that are not translated. The scholars call them the ipsissima verba, the very words that Jesus pronounced. What we have in our English Bible is a translation of the Greek Bible. But the words that are in Aramaic are very special words in the Gospel. And I'm sure you remember some of them. Rabboni, Jesus says, or Mary Magdalene says to the risen Lord, means teacher. On the cross, Jesus says, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? When Jesus raises the daughter of Jairus, he says, Talitha kumi, little lamb, rise up. Abba, Father. Abba is one of those words that Jesus pronounced. And it means like dad or papi or dad. It's a familiar, intimate, affectionate way that someone speaks to their father. And God is listening. He wants to hear. He wants to hear that Abba, Father, in our hearts. An attitude of trust, of affection, of love, of certitude that we are not orphans. We have a loving Father. Today, New Year's, it's always about new beginnings. New Year's Eve is a mythical moment. Right now, there are about 1 million people in Times Square waiting to watch that big glass ball descend at 12 o'clock. You have chosen the better part. To end the old year and to begin the new year in the community of faith, in prayer. This new year, like every new year, is full of hope. We hope not to commit all the same mistakes that we did last year. But this year is also the year of mercy. Pope Francis has declared that this is a year of mercy. One of the beautiful aspects of this pontificate is how the Holy Father has emphasized the theme of God's mercy. In many ways, it's a very clear continuation of St. John Paul II, who gave us Mercy Sunday and encouraged the Divine Mercy devotion. The expression mercy, with its various iterations, appears almost 500 times in the Bible. St. Faustina says that it's God's greatest attribute. Pope Francis has embodied that for us in his pontificate. I was so moved when, in that audience last year, the Holy Father rushed over and embraced a man by the name of Vinicio Riva, who was covered with sores, very deformed, a hideous-looking man. The Holy Father embraced him and kissed him. Afterwards, the man was surrounded by the press, and they were interviewing about this experience. And he said, I am accustomed to people's cruelty. When I get on the bus and sit down, the people move away from me. They turn their eyes from me so as to not have to look at me. People don't want me to get near them because I am so ugly. He said the Holy Father's embrace was one of the most splendid moments in my life. It made me think of St. Francis, who just before he died wrote in his last will and testament about the moment of his conversion when he saw the leper. And at first was repulsed, but instead of running away, he went, he kissed the leper and gave him all of his money, and he wrote later, from that moment on, everything that had been ugliness and terrible was suddenly changed into light and to beauty. Last year it was my privilege to accompany Pope Francis when he went to Assisi. It was the first time he was there. And he began the trip early in the morning. We went in a helicopter, which was an adventure. But as soon as we landed, we went to the Istituto Serafico, which was a hospital for very severely crippled children with their parents. The Holy Father embraced each child, spoke to each parent. And when he talked to us, he talked about the wounds of Christ. And he said, on Easter, when Christ appeared, he still had the wounds on his hands and his feet. The other wounds of the scourging and everything were gone. But in his glorified body, he was still the crucified Christ, still marked with the sign of the nails. And the Pope said, and when he was ascended in heaven, he took those glorified wounds with him. And he talked about these children as being the glorified wounds of the risen Christ that Christ has taken back into heaven. Pope Francis is encouraging all of us in this year of mercy to live the works of mercy, that they might be the way that we conduct our daily business, the corporal works of mercy and the spiritual works of mercy. A big part of mercy is a capacity to forgive. Forgiveness is a new beginning. Last year I went back to Washington for a funeral of a woman who had been in my parish for many years. And her name was Maria Villarta. She was a lovely lady, a big family. And at the end of the Mass, her son, Father Moises, gave the eulogy. And he talked about his mother. And he talked about how, at one point, after having 5 children, that her husband ran off with this young woman and abandoned the family. And the young woman had a baby, and she died giving birth. That man took the baby and went back to his wife. And she took him back, raised his love child, and had 3 more children with him. And the youngest child was this priest, Father Moises, who I ordained a few years ago. And he talked about the experience of his family. He said, I am the fruit of my mother's capacity to forgive. Mercy is life-giving. Mercy changes the course of history, changes our lives and changes the lives of those around us. I remember a couple of years ago, it was on the Feast of the Guardian Angels. A man took an automatic weapon into a country schoolhouse in an Amish community. And he shot 12 little girls between the ages of 6 and 12. 5 of them died. And then the man shot himself. The world was shocked when the Amish community there, the first thing they said was, we forgive him. And they went to his funeral and consoled his parents and his widow. The world was stunned, was shocked, because forgiveness is so difficult. It's never easy, but it is the minimal requirement for a life of discipleship. We pray every day that dangerous petition in the Our Father. Forgive us our trespasses the same way we forgive others theirs. Is that what we really want? We want to be able to forgive the way that God forgives us. Jesus said, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." And the Pharisees stood there and looked at him, so he began to write on the ground. He wrote their sins. And when they saw their sins, then the stones fell from their hands. It's only when we realize how much we need God's mercy that we truly learn to be merciful. One of the greatest parables is that of the Good Samaritan. The question that occasions the parable is, who is my neighbor? And the answer, the one who practiced mercy. The Samaritan practiced mercy. And he practiced mercy with a Jew, a man who was part of a people who despised the Samaritans, looked down on them, would not let them go into the temple. To practice mercy, he had to overcome his prejudices, his hatred, and to be able to see in this wounded person not a stranger, but a neighbor and a brother. We must be people of mercy. That is part of the missionary discipleship that the Holy Father is always talking about. We would never say, "I don't care if that child starves to death. I don't care if that child never learns to read. I don't care if that child bleeds to death." We would never say that. But nor should we ever say, "I don't care if this child never knows God. I don't care if this child never prays or never receives Holy Communion." The Holy Father at Lampedusa talked about the globalization of indifference. The antidote to the globalization of indifference is love, solidarity, and mercy. I've been reading David Brooks' latest book. He talks about the difference between resume virtues and eulogy virtues. The resume virtues are the skills you need for the job market, and they're the ones that we advertise that we have. The eulogy virtues are the ones that people will talk about when we die. Was he kind, brave, or honest, or faithful? What kind of relationships did the person have? Unfortunately, our education system is very much geared to the resume virtues. But as we begin a new year, it's a time to think about those eulogy virtues, especially mercy, compassion, ability to forgive, to share, to nurture. In our preparation for a new year, among our hopes and aspirations, let us resolve to pray more so that we can love more and be more merciful. When Abba, Father, is on our lips, the Spirit of Christ is in our hearts, and we become agents of God's love and mercy. May 2016 be truly a jubilee of mercy that will make God's loving presence more visible in our world, because we who are God's heirs, his children, begin to resemble our Creator and Father, in whose image and likeness we are made. Happy